What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Givin It A Tri podcast, where we dive deep into the world of endurance sports and training. I'm your host, Coach Ken, and today we're going to explore this game-changing approach to my training that has really changed it for the better, for my sustainability and longevity. You probably heard me talk about it in some of the first couple episodes when I went over my it was a two-part series of just my journey in endurance sports and how things lined up from the time I started till about now. And that's going to be the 80-20 method of training. We're going to dive into that today. We're not going to go too deep because inevitably, there's books written on it, there's courses on it. I'm an 80-20 endurance certified coach. There's coaching platforms based off that type of training. So really, this is going to be an overview of just some of the staples. And when someone talks about 80-20 training, or if my coached athletes want to know a little more about it, because whether they know it or not, most of their training for most of the athletes are representative from this system, this methodology of training. And we'll get into that and dive down on some of the topics that are included with this 80-20 training. And that goes for anything. That goes for running, biking, swimming. It's just an overall approach. And you'll see that it does have a lot of science backed on it on why this is a very good choice to structure your training off of that. But I welcome you back. If you are viewing this on a computer or your phone, you're probably on the YouTube channel. You can find the actual video link there if you're watching right here on the camera. If not, you can search for it on many of the platforms if you just want the audio version, something you can listen to while you run or while you're in the car. And that'll be on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, basically any of those platforms. Just search Givin It A Tri. The podcast will pop up. And thank you again. Thank you all for the feedback. Thank you all for following along. And as I record this, it is a couple days before my Shore to Shore 50K, where we're going to run across Long Island. I've done this event a few times before, have some good goals. I'm going to set up a pacing plan tonight for it. But when this podcast hits the air, it'll probably be after that race. Not sure which week that this one will be released, but I'm sure we're gonna have plenty to talk about as that unfolds. So I'm enjoying some of this taper time this week and just catching up on a lot of stuff on the coaching side of things, on the socials, and on the podcast here, and really just having fun with everything. The feedback has been awesome. Thank you for all the questions. We just finished up the one of the last episodes that came out was Coffee with Coach, and that was just a bunch of Q&A questions. So keep rolling those in. Anything you got. If you have more questions in relation to this one, even, please reach out and we'll get in and we'll dive deep on that. So let's start unwinding and unraveling this whole 80-20 training and what it's all about here. And if you're just catching up now and you really haven't listened to some of the past episodes, just a brief background and refresher of how I got into the 80-20 method of training and why it was so important to me, and why I found it very important that one of my coaching certifications be in 80-20 endurance and under their umbrella of coaching. Is when I first started, I had this mentality of just every week, and you get a lot of new gains at the beginning. So it's hard to tell, where your fitness really lies and everything. But I really thought it was, go hard or go home. Every week had to be faster, better, longer than the last. And just this spiral. And then as you dive into the community of endurance and endurance sports, you start to realize, you start going on Strava, you start following people, you start meeting people, you start to see what they're doing, and you start to then compare yourself to them and trying to, without knowing their history of where their past of endurance is, or what type of training they've been doing, or how many years they've been in the sport, you start to compare yourself to them a little bit. And then you start to just kind of want to think about this mentality of society right now, where we just think more work is better. So if I just go run more, run harder, then I'll get to my goals that I want to get to faster. But what you start to really realize is endurance sports is not like that at all. It is this systematic approach, this cyclical approach of doing the right work at the right time, in the right manner, in the progressive manner to reach your goals, and then continue on as your journey goes. So at the first couple years, if you're younger too, it may not affect you as much, but definitely the older athletes, the masters group athletes, it will probably catch up to you sooner than later. Is inevitably you just start to build this large amount of fatigue in the body. You start to you're not cycling intensity properly. You're just thinking that everything has to be better, harder, and faster every week. And that's just not the case. What you'll notice is at some point, these newbie gains of running and, finding out where your baseline is will come to a halt. And that's if you're not overtraining by that point, or your body starts to slow you down by giving you things that'll start to bother you, things that'll start to hurt you, and in the form of injury or overuse, where inevitably you'll have to start taking time off and not being able to put together these blocks. And then what happens then is you have to take a couple weeks off. You come back, you try and jump in right where you were, keep hammering, and it just becomes this vicious cycle over and over and over again. And your progress gets halted because you just aren't structuring things to the best way possible. You're just trying to kind of win over the system of what endurance sports really is. And that's something that's really not going to get you in a good place. And I learned that myself. The first couple years, it was just go, 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 go. And at some point, my body started to revolt a little bit as I started to progress my goals. And for me, if you heard of my story, was my body was starting to be at that point in the year when COVID came and all the races got canceled. So thankfully, at that time when all the races got canceled, I really didn't have a purpose or a reason to keep pushing as much as I was, because I didn't really have any races on the calendar. So I didn't have any half marathon coming up. I didn't have a half Ironman coming up. So what happened was I just was able to deploy the parachute a little bit, take a little bit of a breather, slow my training down literally, and just enjoy running with friends, enjoy being outside, just consistency, just getting it done. So what happened over that progression of that year was my I was starting to correct the things I needed to correct, overuse, almost injury wise. Thankfully, I didn't have to take any time off from any of the sports. And then I started to really dive in because I had time into what is this training all about? Maybe I should start reading some books. Maybe I have time now. We all had time that year to just kind of do things that we don't really have time for. So I started just going through books and buying books and researching and just saying this, what could be the sustainable way to keep going and progress and do all this. And I landed on 80/20. I don't even remember how I came upon it, but it became, when I started reading it and the book, I bought the book and then the audio book, listened to that, read the book. So I got multiple times on there. There's 80/20 running, 80/20 triathlon. And inevitably, what is 80/20 and why did that, what is the basis of it? And without going down the rabbit hole too much, it's a principle of training. And there was a researcher, Dr. Steven Seiler. He was an American scientist studied in Norway, studied all the Norwegian athletes. And what he found was this basically elite best practices, and that's what we call it, is when you follow what the professionals are doing because it works. They have decades worth of research in the laboratories. Like, they're paying for all of this. What you think you're going to be able to do or re-engineer or follow some influencer on social media, trust me, it's really not the way to go. You might as well follow these exercise scientists that have been studying out in the field and in the lab for decades the best practices for these elite athletes. And then all that would filter down into these platforms such as 80/20 training, where really 80% of your training should be done at a low intensity. And we will define that, while 20% should be at a higher intensity. Now, the low intensity workouts allow your body to build this strong aerobic base. It improves fat oxidation, enhances recovery because you're not overloading with so much fatigue. But that high intensity session really includes intervals, tempo runs. Those are designed to improve your speed, your strength, and your overall performance. But when you look at the breakdown, and you may think, well, I don't run that hard, but what you think is easy is really not. It's really something else. And they call this the gray area or the moderate intensity rut in 80/20. And what that is what a lot of people, when they just go out to run, they don't understand where they need to be or the purpose of that run. One thing that I always do when athletes come on board is I analyze some recent past race results and I look at that. I usually look at that first because that's part of our consult. And I get an understanding of like, okay, I see a 5K time, I see a recent half marathon time, maybe a marathon in the last year or two. And I can, even from those performances, start to see where, like, I already kind of know before we even link up on the coaching app, probably where most of their 80% of their training should be and what intensity level, whether, and if we're just looking at pace, even for running. And then when I see their calendar start loading up of the bulk of their miles, they're typically too quick. And what happens is you're not training the energy system that we need to train at this lower intensity. And the problem with that is then you start building all this extra fatigue. So when you have to finally do one of these interval sessions or tempo runs, you're just not in the mood. You're showing up gassed, you're showing up exhausted. You're not able to perform now at the speeds that we want to perform at because you've had a long week of just these miles that were just a little too hard. And we need to separate that. It's separating the intensity. So one of the big things that I work with people on is separating intensity. And inevitably though, there will be, a buy-in to this. And I do a whole presentation I send out to my athletes as they onboard for training intensities and guidelines. There is a buy-in. There is checking your ego at the door, especially again, if you're on social media, you're on Strava, you post a lot of your stuff, because we all inevitably see it when you scroll on and you see like what everybody's running. Wow, this person ran this long run, 8 minutes pace, 7:30. Wow, wow, wow. Like you're like, oh my God, everybody's running so fast. I need to get out there and like start crushing my training. You have to learn to trust the process and be the smart one that is taking the systematic approach to this, is putting in the work in the intensities you're supposed to be in so that your 20% of workouts, which we'll get into, can be those harder workouts. We can break through plateaus. We can start to increase our strength and speed during these workouts. And then if we do this all systematically over a course of a training plan and in a cycle of training, you're going to be able to show up on race day prepped, prepared, and peaked, not just obliterated, bandaged together, KT tape from head to toe, and just being like trying to survive on race day. That's not it at all. And then pair that with some other modalities that we work on, which will be proper pacing and fueling strategies and course profile strategies. That is all together packaged in a bundle for you to unwrap on race day to have a magical experience. So let's get back into a little bit of the science of things here. And again, 80/20. So we're spending the majority of our time training at low intensities. Maximize your fitness without overwhelming your body. That's what it's all about. The more consistent you can train in a longer period of time, where you can string together these solid blocks of training without having to take setbacks or overuse or just burnout, is going to be going to lead you down the path that you need to go in this journey to keep progressing and getting to what is going to be, the best of your ability of what you can do in the sport. Now, when we talk about the application of 80/20, so even if you're not a coached athlete, you know how to coach, and this is something you've been interested in, or you tried it, but you just didn't really understand it, we're going to just kind of like zoom out and look at how we can apply this to endurance training. And again, we're talking about a totality of everything for the week. So if you're a runner, it's all your running. If you're a triathlete, it's all of your swim, bike, run, and all that. So anything you do endurance wise or workout wise, this encompasses everything for the week. So no matter what you do, wherever your heart rate is basically 80% of the work for the week has to be at a certain intensity, while 20% can be at these higher intensities. So when an athlete comes on board, what we do is, if they're fit enough, they've been doing this, they've been racing, I'll just follow them for a little bit and then we'll do some field testing. If they're coming back from a break, I can do some past research on some past runs and past performances and kind of understand and structure in some of, some results already, or I can kind of guesstimate where they probably are with their fitness. and then we'll let it play out. I'll see where it goes. And if we have to, then we'll do some field testing, things like that. And that's going to be a timed run, a timed bike, going by power on the bike, going by pace and heart rate on the run. And I'm going to develop a zone system for you. 80/20 actually uses a 7-zone system. You might be used to a 5-zone system. Garmin has systems. Training Peaks has numerous systems built into it. But 80/20 specifically uses a 7-zone system. And once we take the results from these field tests, and this is going to be a threshold test in running, a power FTP test in biking, we plug all it in, we come up with these zones, and then we discuss the zones. I'll send the zones out to them. I'll send them a video about the zones, and we'll discuss kind of just a summary of where you need to be with the 80% and where you need to be with the 20%. So really, and if you didn't want to get involved in all this because you're on your own, you're self-coached, you're self-guided, really what it is if you can keep the majority of your running or even cycling, but we'll get into cycling a little bit. Running's the easiest to judge, is basically if you can hold a conversation while you're running, kind of just like we are right now, and have full sentences with your run partner, you're probably just about in the zone you need to be in for the bulk of your aerobic miles. Now, if you're running with your run partner and you notice that sometimes you have to take a deep breath, like I am now, to tell a story, you're probably running a little too hard. Your body's not able to get the oxygen in that it needs. So that's why group runs with a friend are super accountable with being able to keep you in that zone you need to be in. Because if you can go out for an hour run, have an entire conversation from start to finish, feel great when you're done, chances are you're probably in the zone we want to be in. This starts to become a problem when you start doing a lot of solo training, and then you kind of just grind it out. If you're like, I want to run 6 miles today, and you kind of like time crunch. So you run out and then you just start running way too fast. And that wasn't really the purpose of the run that you should have been doing. And next thing you know, you couldn't really gauge your conversation test because you weren't talking to anybody. And then you look and like, oh, wow, I ran that pretty fast. Yeah, your heart rate's probably out of the zone we want it to be in. So you're not getting the physiological adaptions that we need. We're not building our mitochondria. We're not building our blood volume. We're not getting this really efficient exchange of oxygen in our body at a lower heart rate. So you kind of just trained outside of your zone, and you're already now dipping into some of that 20% for the week. So that would be, we can do zone testing, or again, RP. Like if this is like a 2, 3 out of 10, 4 is borderline sometimes with these runs. Like it's all day pace, it's party pace, it's just getting it done. This allows you to build a good amount of volume without overwhelming the body. People tend to, especially like marathoners, they wonder how some people run 60, 70, 80 miles a week. And when they can't get past 30, 35 without their body falling apart, probably because within that 30, 35 miles, you're running a majority of those miles just at something that's just not this easier pace. It's just fatigue on top of fatigue if you're running 4 or 5 days a week, and you're just not giving your body a reason to catch up or recover. Now throw a long run at the end of the week in there, and trying to run a faster workout like a tempo run or something like that, and you're just adding levels of fatigue that are just unnecessary and actually going to be detrimental to the progress of your endurance sports. So here we go. We got to plan our week now. We have to understand, okay, we need this separation in intensity. I'm going to deploy the parachute on a lot of my runs. I'm going to slow it down, even my cycling. I'm not just going to go hard every time I go out on my bike. I'm going to really slow it down and start focusing on these aerobic miles. Now, how do we do that? So kind of figure out your total time for the week. If you're training 10 hours a week, it's simple. 8 hours of that training needs to be done at this easier pace, a good amount of aerobic work, while the 20%, that other 2 hours, is going to be built into some interval repeats, some threshold work, some tempo work, some FTP work on the bike at threshold. And that type of separation is what we need. And it's up to an 80-20 balance. Don't think you have to hit this 80-20 balance, right on the head. This is something that we just don't want to do more than 20% of the week. So if looking at 90-10 or 85-15, awesome. And there's one thing I can do with my coached athletes as we use Training Peaks is I'll have their zones broken down by heart rate and pace and all this other stuff, especially running. And when they're kind of like starting to feel crappy or a little fatigued in their plan for their race, I'll say, all right, let me go see how you've been doing for the last couple of weeks. I can go into their performance chart on there. I can search maybe back the last 90 days of workouts for running, and I can see how much time they spent in each of these zones. So specifically for the 7-zone system, zones 1 and 2 are going to be this easy. That's where we want most of that 80%. The next zone is actually not zone 3. It's called zone X. That's that moderate intensity rut. It's not that we don't ever want to do any work in this zone X. And again, this is a percentage of your threshold or a percentage of your pace values. And again, I don't want to get into the numbers and the science of things on how to do that, because that's literally what the entire book is about, or why you really need a coach. But the zone X, again, is more like race pace stuff. It's kind of where a lot of people just fell when they were just training all their hours during the week. So we've slowed down the bulk of the training into that zone 1, zone 2. And I'll be able to pop in there and be like, zone 1, zone 2, we have a lot of this falling into this zone X, and you're filling that bucket up way too much, where maybe only 65% of your work was in zone 1, zone 2, and you have like just too much in zone X, and we're not able to then get to those higher zones during those intervals and thresholds because we were too tired on those days to make that happen. So I can kind of do like an audit on the athletes where I can look and see how much time they spend in these zones over a certain given period of time, and see if it was in fact close to an 80-20 split or where they fall in it. Specifically for myself, for the majority of the year, I actually fall pretty more on the easy side. Like I have room to add into that 20% bulk just because of the amount of I do in this zone 1, zone 2. So I actually wind up falling short of the 80-20. I probably am more of like an 85-15 split. And that's why I guess I feel fresher more often. I'm consistent, and I'm able to just keep putting training blocks after training blocks, is because I understand the importance of this. So we do want to vary our workouts, mix in different forms of training, long, slow, easy runs. They call it LSD, long, slow distance running, easy cycling. Even if you like to go on hikes, that all starts falling into this 80% bucket. So the more low aerobic work you do total for the week will allow you to do more of this 20%, because you'll have a higher volume of this 20%. It will balance out your aerobicness. But you can't just decide, well, because I want to run more often or run harder more often, so I'm just going to slam a bunch of easy stuff so I can go up. It all just volume plays a key, and you can only go up that incrementally week after week, cycle after cycle, to get to a point of volume that you do like. You can't just go from nothing to 10 hours a week without building back into that 10 hours. So again, remember that systematic approach back to training, or to a level of volume that we need. And I'll probably do a separate talk at some point on volume and intensity, and those are two very big factors that of endurance sports, and they're very important to understand them. But getting back in this, it's going to be, again, varying your workouts, all that low intensity stuff, and then high intensity, incorporating tempo runs, interval training, hill sprints, anything that gets your heart rate up into those higher zones above that zone X, basically, is going to be where we want to train in that 20%. Just remember, though, that zone X range is a very big range, and it's important because it is a big race pace range. And as you start to dive into this 80-20 training, you'll start to see that a lot of half marathon, like that distance starts to fall in that X range. And again, it's that range that is between your low intensity and your high intensity, but we've basically trained a lot on both sides of that. We'll do some race specific, closer to race day work within zone X, but it really needs to be closer to the event, race specific, to be working in that zone. If not, we're going to be separating the intensities a little bit more before that. And again, it's really the listening to your body, is paying attention to how your body feels during it. If you're fatigued or experiencing any type of pain or anything during your training, may be assigned to adjust your intensity or take a rest day. So if you are getting close to that 80-20, like you're getting close to that split because you've increased your intensity in relation to your easy stuff. And you start to see that you do feel a little more fatigued at that rate. That's fine. We adjust it down. We take away a little bit of the hard work, add in some more of the easy stuff. It's fine. You'll get plenty of fitness and plenty of gains by doing it that way than as opposed to just trying to think that I have to do all the 20% every week. I have to fill that entire bucket in order to progress, which is not the case. Now, let's talk about some misconceptions about this 80-20 method, because I'm sure there's a few people listening to this that are like, it's garbage, no way, harder, 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 faster, faster, faster. And one of the biggest things is people say that low intensity training is too easy and it doesn't contribute substantially to performance. The simple fact that is, it isn't true. Low intensity training is essential for building endurance, promoting recovery. It allows us to work out more while helping recovery, while still building fitness, which it's like a double bang right there. Especially if you know how to do it and you're okay running at these lower intensities, you're able to get back into training quicker after races because typically what most people do, that aren't following this method, they train, they race, and then they just jump back into it hot and heavy, like a day or two later after their major race. And again, that's just sending fatigue on top of fatigue. And it just inevitably, the body at some point will tell you to stop in the form of overuse, overreaching, or unfortunately injury. Another misconception is that, you have to strictly adhere to the 80-20 rule, and that's not the case. There is flexibility, like I said, within that. Each athlete's needs vary. Again, how I mix up my 80-20 is definitely going to be different than other people. As I notice that some athletes are more resilient against injury than others. Some, unfortunately, come up with things we can't control a little more often than others. So I'll be a little more gentle with how we go to the approach of adjusting their training. And again, it'll be it's tailored towards your fitness levels and goals. And it really depends on the athlete, and it will vary a little bit between persons. All right. And then there's these common questions that come up with it, which by answering some of these questions will maybe answer some of the questions that you may be having with it. But how can a beginner apply 80-20? And we briefly spoke on that, but we can dive in a little bit more to it. But we should prioritize establishing a consistent training routine first. And that is something, no matter the level of athlete that comes on board, is I need to establish that they can consistently train. That's why I like to work with athletes at least a month ahead of when they're going to build towards their A race. So if they're building towards a half marathon, Ironman, whatever it is, and we have this 12, 16, 20-week plan we're going to come up with, I would love to at least have that 4-week block beforehand at the minimum, is because I want to make sure that, especially if I can't see their history of training based on the devices they use, I want to make sure they have a consistency first. We want to build a standard of volume before we do anything. And it's usually, I'll tell them, just go log workouts, go run. If we're running 3 or 4 days a week, just go out, go up to an hour, run easy. Let me see the numbers coming in. And then I'll do some research and I'll be able to guide them and say, you're going a little too fast, or you're perfect, or whatever it is. Once we establish that you have a consistency and a volume, that's when we can build in the intensity portion of it and start bringing in that 20% of training and seeing how far of that 20% we can push. Because again, maybe the athlete can only handle 10 or 15 percent of that high intensity training. So they may not have a true 80-20 split, and that's fine. And then again, we're going to gradually build over time and then build them up to a point where they can have this sustainable 80-20 approach to their training. Is there a risk of overtraining with low intensity workouts? People just wonder, like, at what point is too much low intensity good? And while that low intensity stuff is super beneficial, it is possible to overtrain if you don't have enough variety of cross training. But again, I like to cycle athletes. If they started really early in the year with like half marathons, and they had maybe started in February or January with this building plan for a March half Ironman, and then they're going to go into a second half marathon, and then they're going to go into maybe say a 70.3 training for a triathlon, and maybe a second 70.3, come fall, and maybe they finish the year with a marathon. So in essence, their season has gone from like January-ish to sometimes November. It doesn't really give us a long time to have an off season. So what I like to do is really just like cut down a lot of the intensity in the off season, really give their body a rest and just bring a lot of the stuff back down to being able to keep the consistency, because chances are they might be almost just mentally burned out by this point. And it's happened to a few people where they just throw the flag in and like, I'm done for a little while. And as much as that stinks, that's the athletes, that's their decision. But I always say there's other factors. Like we don't have to train hard and race for a 2 month, 3 month period. Like we'll bring it down. Let's go seriously like 95.5 in your training, where it's like mostly low intensity and high intensity for just a little bit, with just some pickups and a short interval workout here and there, just to keep some of the legs firing. But what that is like, again, it's cyclical. It's not like you're just doing 80 miles of easy running every week and that's it's going to be cycled throughout the year. Your what type of high intensity you're going to do is going to be cycled throughout the year. Whether we're going to do hills because we want to build some strength, or if the intervals are going to be short and then they're going to be longer, we're going to have tempo sessions. So things do cycle, and that's the key to not overtraining anything, is at least a variation in the modalities that you're giving out there. So with the 80-20 training, again, we went through what it is, why it was important to me. It's a super sustainable longevity approach to training. Not only that, just performance wise. Again, most of my athletes fall and fit right into this, and most of them adhere to it. Again, from time to time, I have to bring some people back into the picture, and that's my job as a coach. But the ones that really adhere to it, and there's a handful that are like super regimented. When something says a certain intensity, they're on it. When they're fresh and they have a hard workout, they're on it. They hit it. They go after it. Like that's the day to really go after it. Not only are they hitting their training perfectly, but when race day execution comes and they taper properly, they control the controllables, the other big blocks that we always talk about in endurance, which is your rest, your nutrition, your fueling, and all that, they have amazing race days, like progressing race after race, year after year, season after season. So right then and there also solidifies to me that this works. And not only that, they're consistent. So they're putting together these blocks of training and consistency race after race, where they're not diving themselves into such a hole. It's a sustainable way of training. And specifically for triathlon, and I have the book right here, 80-20 Triathlon, it's one thing for running, like the 80-20 running. There's a book, 80-20 Running. And if you, I don't know, I didn't mention it, but Matt Fitzgerald is the co-author of the book. With running, yes, it's easy. I mean, we break up 4 or 5 days in the intensity, and but when you start adding in swimming, biking, running workouts, in essence, for most people training for an Ironman, 9 sessions a week, 3 swims, 3 bikes, 3 runs, only 7 days in a week. You kind of need a rest day here and there. And, so we're doing some doubles. Like that's when it really becomes important to understand load management for your intensity, because you could be training, and again, depending on the level of athlete you are, 12, 15, 18 hours a week, some people hitting 20 hours a week. So if you're just going kind of too hard too often, like you're going to crash and burn. And I specifically see that at the beginning of these plans, especially for Ironman athletes. And this can even come into play with 70.3 as well, because you can kind of overtrain for that distance, and in a good way, as far as like hitting some solid 60-mile bikes a few times in training and over preparing for the distance, but in a proper way. But what I noticed with the Ironman, and even with the marathon distance, is earlier in the plan, when it's very important to systematically build the body, people want to go too hard too soon. And I tell them all the time, I'm like, pump your brakes, because things will get hard. Come the middle of this plan to 3/4 of the way through this plan, when right before your peaking phase, you're going to be shot, and you're not going to want to hit those weeks. You're not going to want to hit those long runs. Like enjoy these few weeks now when we don't have a whole lot. Don't, if you want, we can throw in another easy run. That's fine early on. But when people are starting to go after it, I start seeing their, quote unquote, not long stuff. Like look at a marathon. If you're going for a 10 or 11 mile run, it's really not a long run in your plan because you're going to be doing some 16, 18, 20 mile runs. They just start running those way too fast, way too early in the plan. They're just not comprehending how important it is. But sometimes, as much as I can work with an athlete, I've told this to other coaches too, you try your best, you try and let them feel that buy-in that they need, checking that ego at the door a little bit. But sometimes they need to feel the frustration of that through a training cycle in order for them to break that when they come back to you at the end and we say, well, how did that work out? Not too good. Next time when we go through this, really trust the process. And that's usually like a turning point in that when they're like, yeah, you're right. I really should have trusted how we were breaking up this intensity, how we were breaking up this volume in training well ahead of time. And, I'll trust the process next time. But the magic part is when I get an athlete that at some point it just all clicks and they start to feel the benefits. They start to feel how much better they feel. Like their overall like cortisol levels of their body start dropping week after week. It starts carrying over to other aspects of their life. Because if you're not carrying this huge load of fatigue through your training, that will inevitably make you just a happier person outside of training. So there are factors that will overall start helping you. And think of it this way too. The sustainability of this type of training. If you didn't have your training structured properly and you made some bad decisions over an extended period of time of training and you wind up with this overuse injury because of the way you were training. Again, things happen. Anything can happen to any athlete any day. But if we were able to control not getting injured because you just overdid it and we knew you were overdoing it and we kind of saw this coming, and now you're not able to train or race for an extended period of time because of that reason, not just because things happen, think how crappy that feels. So take this as a sustainable way. If you want to be doing this season after season, you want to be doing this for 10, 20 years, whatever it is, trust me, I've seen athletes come in now over the last 10 years, all into the sport, flying, crushing races, and then that's it. They're done. They're just burnt out mentally, if not injured. And it was a good 3, 4, 5 years maybe, and that you never see them again. It's the people that have been in this sport for a really long time that you see, you find out that they've been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years. They've been running marathons for 30 years. Chances are they've bought into this methodology of training because it works. It's what the elites use. It's what people at the high level use. And again, it's even more important for us because if we're not training 20 hours a week, where we can devote up to 4 hours of hard training, some people only train for 5 hours a week. So think about it. If you're only training 5 or 6 hours a week, that gives you a very small window of this high intensity breakdown that we need to do. And again, there's some caveats in there depending on what kind of like course you're racing. If this is short course racing, sometimes you can get away with pushing a little bit more intensity for a short period of time to prep for a race. But we're looking like zoom out overall picture with your training. So if you're ever interested in learning more about the 80-20 method, the 80-20 method of training, please reach out. I'd love to. I could talk about training in 80-20, the philosophy and breakdown of it and the method of training for hours. But today, what I really want to do is just wanted to touch base and just put it out there on, so you can kind of understand where my training comes from. And remember, consistency is the name of the game. Whether you're aiming for a marathon, completing your first triathlon, you want to just improve your fitness, implementing this 80-20 principle, it could be the key to unlocking your potential. Sustainability, longevity, consistency, that's the name of the game right there. So I thank you all for tuning in to this episode of the podcast. If you found this episode helpful, or even you want to learn more about this in the future, please reach out. Consider subscribing on whatever platform you're on. Give this video a thumbs up. If you're on YouTube, leave a review, share it with your friends. And again, thank you all for the feedback, and I look forward to hearing from you all as always. And again, by the time this comes out, I'm sure I'll have plenty to talk about with 50K coming up. Good luck to everybody that raced it or is, depending when you listen to this, it will be after the fact. So those that raced it, I hope you had a great race. But until next time, I want everybody to stay safe, stay healthy, keep balancing that life 1 mile at a time, and I'll catch you all on the next one.